This time on the Prop Master, well, we finished working on the rocket. And that means you're going to have to work on one of these. And what that really means is that you're probably going to have to make a whole lot of these. Don't worry, it's really not as bad as that. But you may have to do a couple of them to get the one you like the most. But before we can really get started on that, I have to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel because it doesn't affect you and it really means a lot to the channel. I've been just below 8,000 subscribers now for quite a while, and I'm really trying to get to 30,000 subscribers, so we've got some work to do. And of course, if you can, go out and check my Patreon account. I've got a link down below. There are several different tiers you can choose from, and you get some pretty good perks. But we've got a lot of those to make, so let's get to work. And now that we have all this stuff done, we can actually finally get around to doing something with this block of wood that we made early on in the process, I should say. So we're going to need this, and we're finally going to use our templates as they are. Now the first thing you want to do after you glue your two pieces of 3/4 inch MDF together is we're going to need to remove 1/4 inch off of here. If you don't have a bandsaw or some way to cut a fairly sizable piece of wood, then what I would suggest doing is you're going to need to buy a 3/4 inch thick MDF and a 1/2 inch thick piece of MDF, which may be the better way to go anyway, and glue those two together so that you have a total of 1¼ inches. If you're metric, you'll just have to do whatever combination adds up to 32 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off real quick. Between my bandsaw, this blade, and MDF, it does not want to give me a straight cut at all. So I'm going to end up kind of going all the way around to make this cut. I think even with that, this blade is just not a good blade for this, and I'm going to go ahead and change it. Okay, got a new blade in here. Should be much better for this. I'm going to go ahead and cut it. That went much more smoothly. I'm going to have to clean this up a little bit because of the previous damage that I did to it, but you won't have that problem. And once again, if you don't have a bandsaw, just go with the 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch, and that'll give you the same size. Now we can go ahead and go on to work on this. And always be careful with the bandsaw. And you'll notice there's 3 of these little diagrams here, or I guess these are actually templates. You're only going to need one of them if you're lucky, but there's a good chance you may have to do this a couple times, so I didn't want you to have to keep printing out your template. So just cut one of these out. And I'm going to go ahead and spray the back of this with my spray mount. Doesn't have to be this kind, any spray mount's going to work. So I've sprayed this with my spray mount and I've waited about a minute so it's nice and tacky. And I'm just going to stick it on here in the middle. And the reason why we have such a big block for such a small area here is this size is going to be really stable. And we can go ahead and start punching some divots in here to start drilling. Okay, so I moved over here where I've got a little better light and I can see better. I've just got a hammer and I've got my scratch awl, which I like to use this because it's easier for me to actually see the tip of the awl than it is for my center punch. But you know, you can use whatever center punch you've got. If you'll notice on here, see if I can get a little focus. It's not just lines and circles. There's also little white dots at each one of these locations, including the center. And those are going to be where we're going to go ahead and punch with our center punch. That's where we're going to end up drilling. And let me just say now, if you don't have a drill press, then I wouldn't worry about trying to drill this right here. I would center punch this center dot and that's it. Don't try to drill these by hand. And the reason why these little dots are so small is that little adage about aim small, miss small. So the odds of me actually hitting this perfectly are pretty remote, but you know, the smaller the spot that I'm aiming for is, the closer I'm going to get to being in the right spot. And now I'm just going to go ahead and go around and hit all the rest of these. So that's the first ring. Let's go for the second one. Now the final ring. Okay, and there we go. And they're definitely not perfect. One in particular that I started off with is really close. Like right in there, that's, you know, those two together are really close. If it doesn't work out well, that may just be the bottom, it'll be fine. It won't be that noticeable. So don't get totally frustrated if it's not perfect, because odds are it's not going to be. It's not going to be after you drill them either, but it's going to be pretty good. So now we can go ahead and move on to the drill press. Okay, so we're back at the drill press, and the way we've got this set up, this is a 1.5 millimeter hole saw. That's 1.5 inch or 38 millimeter hole saw, and it's got a 1/4 inch pilot bit in the middle of it. I guess that would be a 6 millimeter bit. And the way I've got this set up, this is just, you know, almost on top of the block of wood, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that, I mean, first, it does fit under here, but that when we go all the way down, that the depth gauge is set so that the pilot bit just barely touches the top of the table. That way when we go down all the way, this will just barely start to poke a hole in the bottom of the block. And that also gives us, well, you'll understand more later, it's going to give us plenty of wood to hold this together. You may be asking, why not just go ahead and drill it all the way through? It's like, well, basically we want to keep this block for as long as we can because it's really stable. Then your second question might be, why are we drilling this out right now? And it's because, as I found with several tries, if I drill a whole bunch of holes through here, it weakens the wood enough that when I try to drill this big hole around it, what we really end up with is it twists off. And actually the wood just can't handle that much stress and breaks. So we do most of that drilling, then we drill all of our little holes that weaken it, and then we drill just a little bit at the very bottom. So let's go ahead and do that and you'll understand it more. Just like before, I lift this up until I can get it sort of in the right place. And unlike what I'll be doing later, I'm actually going to use some clamps to hold this down, because we're going to exert a fair amount of strain on this. So I'm basically holding the block in place with the drill bit itself. Now that I've got both clamps in position, I can go ahead and tighten them down. Okay. And let's go ahead and drill this all the way down. Now the thing about a hole saw is you're not going to just drill through here. You're going to go down about 1/4 of an eighth of an inch, and then that sawdust can't get out of that. So it's going to kind of build up there, and at that point all you're going to do is start a fire. So you have to lift this back up and blow all the dust out. Also, I'm going to make a lot of dust doing this, so I'm going to go ahead and put on my mask. And then, so we'll go down 1/4 of an inch, bring it up, clean off the teeth, clean off the area, go down, do it again. So you can see this layer of sawdust just caked into those teeth. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just feel underneath here to make sure there's a little bit of a hole. So we're pretty much done at this point with this part of the using the hole saw. Now I've switched over to a 5/8 inch Forstner bit for this next hole. I'm going with that size just because this little nut right here is not quite 1/2 of an inch, but it's really close to it. So I went one size higher. And yeah, you don't have to use a Forstner bit. You could easily use a regular drill bit. If the biggest drill bit you have is a 1/2 inch, you can go ahead and use that. It should still work. This just gives me a little bit more to play around with. I'm going to flip this upside down. This very small hole is the reason. This very small hole is the reason why we only drilled down to the surface of this table here and not all the way through. We wanted to make this hole as small as possible. So we can kind of line that up. And I only want to go down deep enough for the size of that nut. I'm just kind of double checking to get as close to center as I can. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. And so there we go. We have a nice spot there for this nut to fit into. It looks like we might need to go just a tad deeper. And that fits in there nicely. So we're finished with that. And you can definitely still do this with a regular drill. You do not need to have a drill press for that. However, from this point, all these little drill holes here, you're definitely going to need to use a drill press, or just skip this step. Okay, so now I've switched over to a 3/32 of an inch bit, and I've set my depth gauge for 1/2 of an inch. And I'm going to do very much like I did before. I'm not going to clamp this down because I want it to be able to feel if it's trying to move. Just lift this up until it kind of snaps into position. I want to see if it moves. Notice it moved a little bit there. It threw it to the right or to the left. I want to make sure it's not moving at all. And I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay, so there's one full circle. Now I want to set my depth gauge to 7/8 of an inch. Okay, now we have that set to 7/8 of an inch. We can go ahead and do this next circle, the middle circle. Now we're getting to a depth where you may have to clean out your bit each time. make sure you're going nice and slow when you're drilling these. If you go in really fast, it's going to deflect the bit, and we definitely do not want that. So now we've finished that whole circle, and we can go on to this last one. For that, we want to go ahead and drop down to 1 1/16 of an inch. By the way, I believe this is would be the equivalent of a 2mm bit. You don't want to go, I tried to go one size bigger than this, and I had a lot of trouble with the strength of the piece, the finished piece. So I really wouldn't go any bigger than this if you can. So I think it's like 2.3 millimeters, but I would not go to a 3mm. We're now going deep enough that not only will we probably have to clean the bit, what we'll want to do is only go down a certain amount and then bring it up and go back down some more to keep cleaning out that hole, because once again, what we're trying to avoid is the deflection of this bit. It's going to take a little bit longer, but it'll be a much better result in the long run. Okay, so that's all of the holes drilled, and we can get back on with life. So now that we have all of these little holes drilled, we can go ahead and finish the process of freeing up this cylinder. I'm back to the 1.5 inch or 38mm hole saw, and I'm just going to flip this over, and I'm going to use the existing pilot hole to make sure it's perfectly centered. Adjust the depth gauge to all the way. Now we can go ahead and finish cutting out this cylinder. And we've got this little ridge where it kind of tore through, but that's absolutely fine. When we turn this into a cone, it's going to remove all that. So now we actually have a little cylinder. Now it's time for us to use some of that 1/4 inch aluminum rod that we bought. Now, unfortunately, you only need about 3 inches of that whole rod. So if you don't want to go to that expense, you can go ahead and cut off a 3-inch section of your wooden 1/4 inch wooden dowel. This will work. I like the aluminum just because I know that it's going to be a lot straighter and not have any warping at all. The dowel is going to be pretty straight, but it might have a little bit of a warp to it. But in a 3-inch section, it's probably going to be just fine. So don't feel bad if you don't want to spend the money for a whole aluminum rod just for a 3-inch section. They're not that expensive, but it is, money's money. Now, either way you go, you're going to want to sand a little bit of a bevel on there, not much, just so you don't have a sharp edge at the top. This will help it slide into the wood a lot easier. And you just want to push it on there. It's not going to be super tight. You should be able to do it by your hand, but you do want to push it pretty much all the way in. And if you notice here, I've got my electric drill and I've just got it put in a vise. I've just chucked this piece into my drill, and now I can go about marking this. Okay, I thought I was filming, but apparently I was not. So let me kind of go over what I just did. I made a mark on here that is about 3/16 of an inch. Doesn't have to be perfect, but between 3/16 and 1/8 of an inch. I made a measurement to that size, and then made a mark, and then by rotating this, I was able to connect that line. The first line I made was a little bit too big. It was too close to 1/4 of an inch. So I made a little, another line that was a little further back. You don't want it to be 1/4 of an inch because it starts to look a little different than it should at that point. But if you're anywhere in the neighborhood of 3/16 and 1/8 of an inch, it should be just fine. If you want to, I had a real hard time doing this while filming it because of I kind of need to be where the camera is. You want there to be about 1/16 of an inch of wood on the outside of the aluminum. Make a line there. And you're basically going to connect these 2 lines to make the cone shape. And you can do that with your drill just in a vise the way it is. I've got my coarsest sanding stick. And start this, and it will definitely do a pretty good job of shaping it. But to be a lot faster, I have a disc sander and I'm going to use it. Okay, so once again, I thought I was recording, but apparently it shut off. So I'm going to do this again. I made a whole new piece, and we're going to do this one more time. This thing spins in this direction here, so you want to make sure that this spins in the opposite direction, like this. Otherwise, you're just kind of chasing along at the same direction, and you're not really sanding very well. So go opposite the direction that it's spinning. This is not particularly coarse. When I first tried to do this, I used I think it was a 40 grit sandpaper, and it just destroyed this piece. I think I've got a sample here somewhere that, well, this isn't it, but you get this kind of effect where it just tears chunks out, which is not what we want. I wouldn't use anything coarser than 80 grit. That's what this is right here. And probably 120 grit would be better. I've also, if you can see, I've flipped this around so that the front is facing, away from where we're going to be sanding. So I'm going to do the back first. This is our 3/16 of an inch line, and I'm going to put a 45-degree bevel on this. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull this off and flip it around. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and here's our line that's about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch away from the silver, from the aluminum, and we're going to connect that line with this bevel. I'm going to generate a lot of sawdust, so I'm going to go ahead and put on my mask. Okay, and there we have it. Okay, you ready to finish this up? All I've got here is a piece of 3/4 inch MDF, and I've got a 3/4 inch hole saw, which is 19 millimeters, and a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter pilot bit. Now, you might ask yourself, why not just get a dowel that is the same size as the inside of this hole saw? And that's what I tried originally. But because of the grain structure in there, even if you are perfect with your measurements and you get the exact center perfectly, when you punch it, the grain moves it off a little bit off from the center. When you start to drill it, it starts to move off from the center, and it's almost impossible to get a perfect hole drilled to the middle of this dowel. Plus, after several attempts of that, it became pretty obvious that the dowels themselves are not perfectly circular, and that's not a good thing either. But if you use the hole saw, you will get a perfect cylinder, perfectly circular cylinder, with the right size hole drilled perfectly in the middle of it. So this is really worth the $12 it costs to go ahead and buy it. And nothing special here. We're going to go ahead and use the hole saw just like before. You do need to only go down a quarter to an eighth of an inch in depth, so 3 to 6 millimeters in depth, and then you have to clean out the teeth and blow out the sawdust to get down any further. Just keep doing that until you go all the way through. Notice I've got a piece of scrap wood underneath here, so I can drill all the way through this into here. Just got my compressed air because I'm going to have a mask on and I won't be able to blow. Canned air also works really good for that if you don't have a compressor, or you can just take the whole thing off and dump the sand, dump everything out of it and start over again. Okay, let's get whole. Let's take the piece out of here and we'll be good. I've just unscrewed the hole saw itself from the mount and the pilot bit. And now I can just take something, and it's not jammed in there at all. It just needs some way to get a hold of it. And there's our piece. So we're back over at the disc sander, and I've got my little piece that we just cut out. And we finally got to get around to using that 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter dowel. Now, make sure this matches the hole size here. So if you were using a 5 millimeter pilot bit to drill this out, use a 5 millimeter dowel. I'm not sure what the standard sizes are other than the United States. So here it's a 1/4 inch hole, 1/4 inch dowel. Carefully push this in. And then I'm just going to put this in the chuck of my hand drill. Doesn't have to be super tight, just tight enough. And kind of like we did before, we're just going to put a 45-degree bevel on this edge. Not super huge. Let's take a look at our piece of paper. Basically, we're going to put this bevel right here in, and it's, an 1/8 of an inch to 3 millimeters deep there. So I'm going to go ahead and make a mark on here of 1/8 of an inch. And then I can spin this and use that mark . And we're just going to put about the same, 45-degree angle, so like 1/8 of an inch here to 1/8 of an inch here. You want to rotate this slowly, because this dowel's not perfectly straight, so it's got a bit of a wobble to it. So at a high speed, it's going to, be doing that. We just want to slowly circle around while this does the work. And that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. So carefully remove this from the dowel. So now that we've pulled this off, well, we pulled this off of here, we want to flip it around so that the beveled end is toward the drill. And we want to glue this. You can use wood glue, or I'm going to use some of this gel super glue. The only worry about super glue is you want to make sure you get this on all the way before the super glue sets up. You want to make sure that you get enough glue in there that it will definitely hold on. And we need to get this all the way on to where the wood is flush with the dowel before the glue sets up. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to give that a few seconds to set up. Okay, that's definitely on there good. Now I wanted to make a bevel here that goes from, so you can actually see it, from the bevel here where we just made that bevel, and we want to come all the way in to where we're at the size of the dowel. That's why we want to make sure that the dowel and this piece of wood are one piece of wood now, so that we can basically make that bevel go all the way to the dowel. It's a little bit of a wobble, but not too bad. Make sure it's the opposite direction that that's going, and let's go ahead and do this. Okay, you can see where I was getting a little too close to the dowel before I was getting to this bevel edge back in the back. So I changed angles to make sure that we hit at the same time. So there we have it. Now we just need to add this to the other piece. So let's do some assembling real quick. Now it's about 9 degrees outside, which is about, that's Fahrenheit, so about negative 13 degrees Celsius. And it's not much warmer in the garage here, so I've had all this stuff inside where it's warm, and as soon as I finish this, I'm going to take it back inside where it's warm so that the glues will work the way they're supposed to. And you notice I have all these parts pretty much assembled. I have the nut on the end here, and I'm going to use this as a guide to attach the nut onto here. And you definitely want to use a gel cyanoacrylate glue or super glue, crazy glue. Just make sure it's the gel so it doesn't run, because the last thing we want to do is to glue this nut onto the threads of the screw here. So I'm going to spray this inside part with the zip kicker just so that it will cure as soon as it touches. You don't have to do that, but if you've got it, it will speed things up a little bit. I'm going to take my gel super glue, and being extremely careful not to get any of it on the threads, I'm going to put some glue on the tips of the nut. And then using the screw as a guide in here, I can just drop this into position and it should cure instantly. And then I can unscrew this off of here. Okay, and there's our nut in position. Now, just because super glue is not super strong when it comes to shear, which is what we'd have here, I'm going to take some hot glue, and once again, being careful not to get anything near the threads, I'm going to fill in this little gap around the nut with hot glue. I also don't want this to get above the level of the, we don't want it to stick out further than the wood here. I can't really see what I'm doing very well, but I'm probably going to have to clean this up a bit. Hot glue doesn't feel so bad, but it's way below freezing outside. Okay, I'm going to fill in a couple of gaps where I can actually see real quick. Okay, so the hot glue will basically help support that nut and keep it from spinning. And the most important part is just to make sure you don't get anything in with those threads. So now that that's cooled off, we can screw this on. And this will kind of hold everything together. Doesn't have to be super tight. And now we need to find out how deep, the carriage bolt only goes up to about here somewhere, but we need to find out exactly how deep that is. So I just have end of a paintbrush here. I'm just going to stick it in there, mark it with my finger. So I know that's how much material we have. And now that I have this piece here, I have to cut all of this 1/4 inch dowel off except for what I have here. So I need to make sure that the dowel is shorter than the amount of space that's in there, but only just barely shorter. Because I really need the support that the dowel will give inside here to hold this piece on, but it needs to fit all the way in. So I'm going to mark it where it is, but I'm going to cut it a little bit short. It's like there. So let me cut this real quick and we can go ahead and finish this up. Okay, so I've cut this piece, and I've also taken a file and just put a little bit of a bevel on the end of that so that it's not a sharp 90-degree edge. This will help it, fit into the this will help it to fit into the hole at the end without breaking anything too badly. And I'm going to go with the wood glue for this because I want this to be a very strong connection. Clean up all this excess. And I'm just going to slide this into here, being careful not to break it, because the end of this piece is really fragile right now. So what we're doing right now is we're supporting that with the 1/4 inch dowel. And that's a nice good connection there. So now we're to the kind of the end here. I have my small dowel, should be 1/8 of an inch or as small as you can get. This is a little bigger than 1/8 of an inch, but this is the smallest thing I could find. 1/8 of an inch would be better, but this will work. And I'm just going to cut an 1/8 of an inch piece off of the end. I'll be right back. Okay, so here's our little piece that I just cut off. Now it seems a little ridiculous to buy an entire dowel for this one little piece of wood. So if you have something else that's, a small cylinder that you want to use, that's also fine. And something like this little end of a paintbrush that I used earlier, you could easily use that as well. But once you have your piece here, I'm going to go back to the super glue. And you should be able to see the center of this because it's the dowel instead of the MDF. And try to get it in the center as best you can. And mine's a little big. That piece of dowel is a little too big for this, to be honest. So I'll have to probably take some sandpaper or some files and really try to make that smaller. Or I may just go back to, like I was saying, use this piece here and cut some piece off that and use it instead. See if I can break that off. But now would be a good time, if you haven't done the drilling, to go in with a black marker and just start doing, paint in the ovals here, because that's really your only thing you're going to be able to do if you don't have a drill press, because there's just no way you can get these precisely drilled holes in there. So go ahead and well, I guess you wouldn't paint those on now because we're going to paint this whole thing and you just covered up. So ignore what I just said. And when we start painting, then you'll go in and paint these little ovals in. I'm going to go ahead and put a thin coating of the filler primer on there just so it'll all be one color and we can take a better look at it. If you like this video or found it helpful, why not go ahead and give it a thumbs up? And of course, subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos. You can also click that little bell so you'll be instantly notified when new videos come out. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. It's really your likes, comments, and subscriptions that motivate me to keep this channel going. So until next time, thanks.